Nobody warned you about the most dangerous day of a high performer's life. It's not the day you fail. You know how to handle failure. You've trained for it. It's the day the mission that built you changes, ends, or maybe gets handed to someone else, or just quietly stops pulling you in the way that it used to. The day you win the last thing you were chasing, or you walk away from it, or maybe you've hit every number and the climb you love goes flat. And for the first time in years, nobody's telling you where to point. What's that next target? What's the mission? I've watched this happen a dozen different ways. The founder who finally sold the company he spent 20 years building. Maybe the executive who got the title, hit every target. And then he realized that the climb was the point, not the view. The owner whose business stopped growing and went quiet, who can't tell anymore if the problem is the business or him. It's different stories, same Monday morning. Same person, same drive, no target. You know, my guest, he lived the most extreme version of this that I've ever heard. He didn't choose to leave. He was special forces, 16 years, tip of the spear, and a parachute accident took the career out of his hands. Overnight, the thing that defined him was gone. And he had to answer the question that every one of us eventually answers. Whether you leave the military, sell the business, change careers at the top of your game, maybe just outgrow the version of yourself that got you here. And that question is, who am I when the mission changes? Today's episode is part 1 of 2 with Dean Stott. And I want to tell you up front why I split it. Today is the harder, I'll call it more human half, how the mission gets taken from you, what that first year actually feels like, and then the moment it turns around. The next episode is the playbook, the exact traits and the system he used to rebuild twice. But you can't use the playbook until you've sat in this first part honestly. So here's what you walk out with today. You'll understand why the identity crisis that hits high performers after a win, an exit, a career change, a plateau is completely normal, and why it has almost nothing to do with your capability. And you're going to hear the exact moment Dean stopped grieving the old mission and found a new target. That shift is the whole ballgame. This is a build episode, not a diagnosis. You're going to leave with something to do Monday. I'm Scott Joseph. This is Business, Bourbon, and Cigars. If we haven't met yet, I've spent over 30 years running J&L marketing and buying companies along the way. Now I run Me Plus Ultra, a group for owners and leaders who've outgrown the rooms they've started in. I can sit across from Dean and ask these questions honestly because I've had my own smaller version. A few years back, I'd built the businesses, made the money, handed the day-to-day to my partner. And I was angrier, literally, I would say more lost than when I was broken building. I flew to Costa Rica for 2 weeks to work on nothing more than myself. What I found waiting wasn't a strategy problem, it was my ego. So I get it. So know why Dean, 16 years in the UK Special Forces, the SBS, when a parachute accident forced him out. So he builds a private security company from nothing and personally evacuated embassies out of war zones. Then, having barely ridden a bike, he became the first man to cycle the entire Pan-American highway in under 100 days. 99 days, 14,000 miles. 2 continents. He raised $1.4 million for mental health. He wrote it all in his book, Relentless. And he's doing it again right now, pivoting into finance in his late 40s. He rebuilt his whole identity from zero more than once. He's living proof of the thing I want you to take from today. And that's the person who built what you've built doesn't expire when the mission changes. So here's today. I take Dean back to the accident and the exit that he never wanted. What those first months felt like when the assets and the team, the identity all disappeared at once. Who saw his way out before he did? I want to find out what that single shift was, from grieving what he'd lost to aiming at something new that started everything. That shift is where we're going to leave it today. The next episode, we're going to build on it. So pour your favorite bourbon, light a great cigar, and settle in. Dean, welcome to Business, Bourbon, and Cigars.
I appreciate you having me on.
Love it. All right. Important topic. I think this, as I was saying in my intro, there are a lot of business people out there that struggle with a lot of the same type of transitions, whether it is starting a completely new career, maybe leveling up to a different responsibility that they now need, or need to transition into the person they need to become to take their business to that next level. And sometimes they get a little lost along the way, but I don't think anybody, there's nothing in the business world that compares to what you went through. So I kind of want to, for the people who don't know you, right, I want to kind of get off the ground running here and introduce them to you. Take me back to that time when you were transitioning out, right? When you were still in, your mission was clear. Who did you believe you were?
For me, probably to, just introduce myself, I did 16 years in UK Tier 1 Special Forces. But transition normally is planned. Transition is normally like, right, I'm coming towards the end of my career. I have 2 years left to do. Let's start that transition process. And there's procedures in place. There's courses that you can go on and prepare you for that exit, because that exit is difficult in your life. For me, I had no choice. I didn't want to leave the military. It wasn't my choice to leave the military. Unfortunately, a parachute accident sped up that process. And so I didn't want to transition. I had no aspirations of actually becoming a civilian. For me, I was what we call a lifer. I would have actually still been in now. I would probably be sat in a desk as an officer, just pushing paper. So that was the first shot for me, was the fact that you have no choice. You now have to transition. You're now going to leave this tribe and you can no longer come back into this tribe. But also what I was dealing with was two things. There was the transition and then there was the identity crisis. I got to where I had because of my physical attributes. I built up a reputation. I was now in amongst a group of like-minded individuals that had that same sort of drive, that same sort of passion. So now, where do I fit in society? And what skills and traits do I have which are transferable into this quite an alien environment for me? Because I joined the army at 17. I was now 33. So half of my life had been in the special forces. And prior to that, my father was in the military. So I wasn't really aware of this environment here. And that was what was scary to me, was the transition and then the identity crisis. So I was dealing with two things at once.
Going back into that when, before the parachuting thing, which we'll get into in a second here, but, that version of you, because what I'm curious about is where you're at now. What that version of you, go back in time, what got you out of bed in the morning?
I'd probably say what got me into the military first. I never actually, for your listeners, I never actually wanted to join the military. I always wanted to be a fireman. And, I know there's guys I served along there throughout their life. Their goal was to be in the special forces. I sort of stumbled across it by accident, if that made sense. And, my dad was like the Ted Lasso of the army. Now I've watched Ted Lasso, is nothing like my father. I wanted to be a fireman, and I ended up in on a surfing holiday for 2 weeks, which turned into 6 months, long before the mobile phones. And my father found me working in a surf shop and told me I'd wasted my education. And this will go back to what drives me and gets me out of bed. On that lengthy trip home for 4 hours, my father's like, you wasted your life. What are you going to do? And for me, I said, well, I'll join the military. And he said, you'll last 2 minutes. And for me, that was just enough fire in my belly to prove that person wrong. And then throughout my career, actually, there's been times where people will challenge you that you can't do it, and you just say, right. And that was enough to get me out of bed, was to prove other people wrong. And I find throughout life, you can have a disagreement with someone or have a different opinion on a certain thing. And then you can argue, you can verbally go for it. And, maybe you may change their mind, but actually the best course of action is action itself, going out and doing it. And so that was my initial one. That's what got me out of bed and got me into the military. And then as my career then went on, there was other challenges, other people saying you can't do it. And also one thing in the military, you're very proud of your cap badge or where you come from. So you feel like you're an ambassador for your unit, whether you're on deployment, whether you're on courses and things like that. And so, that was enough for me, was representing who I was, my unit and my country, for me to get out of bed.
It's funny. I'm sitting here smiling because when you said you won't last 2 minutes, although much smaller scale, a lot less consequences than what you dealt with. When I told my dad, I was working with my dad and I was 22 and I said, you know what, I think I'm going to start a company. And that's what ended up being J&L Marketing, which led to other businesses. But he goes, you'll be back here in 3 months. It's exactly what he told me.
But do you also putting a question back? I know I'm not the host. Do you think that was also reverse psychology? Because for me now, when I look back at it, that gave me enough fire to prove him wrong. And actually, once I went to the careers office, he knew that I was being serious. He was fully behind me then. He was actually quite instrumental in those initial stages about where I go and what I join and how I can get as much from the military. So looking back, yeah, it may have been a throwaway comment and he probably didn't understand the power of words, but it also may have been reverse psychology. I don't know.
I don't think he was trying to do any reverse psychology. I think he may have said it to make sure I was fully committed to it. And understood what I was getting into because, at one hand, he's also losing a salesperson that was producing results. And so not to say that he would stop me from achieving something for that, but I think it definitely motivated me. But I will tell you, he was 100, just like yours, he was 100% supportive once I was all in. He was my first client. So, I mean, he pushed and did what he had to do to help me get off the ground. And so yeah, he wasn't trying to do anything other than I've never actually thought about it. It's a good question. I think he was probably just making sure fully and making a point as this isn't going to be as easy as you think.
Yeah. Yeah. True. So,
all right. So now your chapter closes, right? You're out of the military, but for a lot of people, especially in business, that's a real easy, not easy, but a transition that's somewhat planned and organized and I'll say common. Yours was anything but common, right? So walk me through how your military career actually ended. And then what did it feel like in those first few weeks after?
The initial one for me, being in the Tier 1 Special Forces, it's really interesting. When you're in there, you're almost like a rock star. You have all the assets available to you. You are literally the tip of the spear. And so, they keep everything away from all the distractions away from you. You can just focus on the mission, and you are pretty much treated like that. If you need assets, you need need an aircraft, you get an aircraft. If all these things, and then so for me was really how that sort of changed overnight. So when I had my parachuting injury, also the issue with my injury when I was in Oman where this happened, it was the same time as the Icelandic volcano had erupted. It didn't really affect the USA, but across Europe and the Middle East, it grounded a lot of aircraft. And so I actually couldn't get home initially for that initial treatment. I was actually stuck in a hotel with painkillers for 6 weeks. Then when I finally did get home, I went to the doctors. They then sent me home for another 6 weeks. So that initial period where you could be recovering and could be helping yourself, I'd sort of lost that. And then unfortunately, there was a whole spiral of errors after that. The medical system lost my MRI scans. There was a whole period then, which for me was quite upsetting because actually, when I started challenging the military, they realized actually you're no longer used to it. You're no longer of any use to us. And so you always ended up at the bottom of the pile. So you've gone from this position where they would do anything for you to make sure you're on the ground, you're achieving your mission, and you're back out and you're fit again and you're on deployment to almost you've just been pushed aside. And so that was quite difficult for me to go from that to there. And then from the identity crisis side, I got to where I had in the Special Forces because my physical attributes, I now couldn't even run 50 meters without my knee giving way. And so one of those traits that got me into that position, I'd lost that. I'd lost that skill of that physical endurance. So that was hard to deal with at the beginning, but also to add to the pressure as well. My wife was pregnant with our first child. And so as I'm also transitioning, I have these pressures to deal with. I have this identity crisis to deal with. I also have to deal with how am I going to support my new family? It's very easy when you're in the military. They have everything for you. They have a great welfare package. They house you and they do a lot. And now you're left on your own. But I think when I look at other veterans, I see some veterans' transitions can be quite smooth and the others can be quite turbulent. And now having spent a bit of time in the space, those that are smooth is because they have a great support network around them, as in their inner circle. Thankfully for me, where my transition was made smooth, my wife was very entrepreneurial. When I met my wife, she was a bank manager in 4 banks. I always say the military, like your mother, your father, they clothe you, they feed you, they pay you on time. I didn't know what electrical company provides the electric or the gas or the water to the camp. I didn't care. That was done for you, so I could focus on the mission. So thankfully, my wife came in and she took that away from me. I still don't know who provides the gas, the electric, or the water to this house. You know what I mean? So that helped me in a lot of things. That helped the transition.
Other than your world records, Dean, other than your world record and your military accomplishments, you and I are exactly the same in that sense.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I don't know anything either about my house.
Exactly. So that helped as well. You have to imagine that these boys and girls, they join the army at 17. They've never had to reach out to their local council or district for things that is already done for you. And so you're almost like, it's almost like being a teenager again, starting over, learning from scratch. And there isn't anything in place. And just to sort of add some meat to the bones for your audience. So in the UK, the only thing we do on our transition program is they teach us to write a CV and interview techniques. Well, I've never written a CV or resume, and I've never had an interview. How's that? But I want to know about what NDAs are, proposals. Who do I speak to for this and this? And so there's a lot of. I think they're getting better, but I don't think they are really. But we don't have. Also in the UK, we don't have what you have in America, which I think is great, is you have access to now an education. You can go get a degree. We don't have any of that. We have nothing. And so you are literally left to your own devices. And so there's all these things. And like I said, for me, what I don't have long, I'm now leaving. What is something I can jump into straight away, which is going to support my family while we get on our feet? And without sounding like Liam Neeson, when you have a particular set of skills, it is the private security sector.
Yeah, that's it. Well, hey, that's a smart move. I guess where I'm wondering, was there I will say, when I was stepping away from something I had done for 20 some odd years, almost 30 years, and I knew it was time to let my partner just run that day to day, and because I was probably getting in the way more than I was helping. I was slowing the pivots that we were doing, and quite honestly, I was chasing an older model and doubling down on the older model, and it really needed to go in a different direction in terms of how we operate the business. But I remember there was a single moment in time for me where my partner said, because I was dabbling in this and I was dabbling in that and trying to find what is it that I want to do next. And he goes, you have a brand problem. He goes, you're communicating this and you're communicating that. And so I bring that up only because that moment stands out to me. And there's 2 other moments that stand out to me. I was on a retreat out in California, and this is one of those clear your mind type stuff, hiking for 2 weeks, this and that. And it happened literally 1 week before everything in the United States shut down for COVID. So I'm at that end of the first week and getting ready to go into the second week. And now I'm sitting there I got my phone back. I was sitting there talking to my wife saying, I'm coming home first flight in the morning, because I'm sitting there thinking they're about to cancel domestic flights. And I am not driving from California, from LA to Louisville, Kentucky. And so if I can even get a rental car. And so I told her, I said, I'm getting on the first flight. I'm coming home. But in that time period, Jamil, my partner, he had accomplished things and had contingency plans for what the businesses was going to do for COVID before it was even definite on, the lockdowns and all these things, and far superior than what I would have come up with. And then the last thing I remember, key moment for me, was I remember I was really frustrated with J&L, and just like I said, I was doubling down, getting angrier and angrier, make more calls, do this, do that, instead of changing the approach and adapting to what needed to happen in today's marketplace. And I remember thinking to myself, why am I, because at this point I had multiple dealerships, and I'm thinking, why am I so happy with those businesses? And I'm getting so frustrated with J&L marketing. And I realized, well, I'm not involved in the day-to-day of those businesses. I'm just getting checks. And I'm thinking to myself, I have a guy who's more in touch, and my partner and Jamil, more in touch with our clients than I am at this stage, because he's involved day-to-day. He's more involved in operations, and now he's picked up and his vision and his just overall leadership skills just grew immensely in these 5 years leading up to this. And I remember thinking, well, that's it. What am I doing? So those were three things that just really stand out to me, that made me realize I need to move on from the person I was.
Right now, you're juggling every decision, putting out fires, and trying to grow your business on your own. Every day feels like a grind, and no matter how hard you push, the breakthrough you've been chasing seems like it's just out of reach. You don't have the right perspective, or maybe the network to see the opportunities waiting for you. The Business, Bourbon, and Cigars Leadership Retreat is your chance to change that. Imagine being in a room with entrepreneurs who have already overcome the challenges you're facing, leaders who have scaled, innovated, and found the clarity you're searching for. Through our mastermind style sessions, you're going to gain actionable strategies and the opportunity to connect with active Me Plus Ultra members. These aren't just networking contacts. They are entrepreneurs who think strategically, spot opportunity quickly, and can provide insights that accelerate your growth. This experience allows you to see firsthand how high-level leaders solve problems, create momentum, and unlock opportunities, so you can leave the retreat not just with a plan, but with a network that expands your possibilities faster than you ever thought possible. The first 5 people to apply at meplusultra.com/BBC50 is going to receive 50% off their ticket. Don't wait. Secure your spot now and step into a space where real business breakthroughs happen.
I guess where I'm going is long-ass explanations is to ask you one simple question. When you're going through this, because you're sitting there saying, I don't know how to do these things, and I don't know how to do these things. What's next? Was there a single moment that kind of brought that clarity to you where you're like, yeah, I don't have a spot right now, and this is where I got to go?
Yeah, I think for me, I was very fortunate when I actually did leave the military. It was May 2011. So it was the height of the Arab Spring in Middle East and North Africa. And so my first question, is there any work out there? Will I be able to support my family? That was answered quite quick. Within 48 hours of leaving the camp gates, I got a phone call, asked if I can help set up the British Embassy in Benghazi. So that for me was like, okay, well, that takes the initial pressure off, that we can support my family. Did I know what I was going to do next? I don't know. I always said to my wife, I want to find a niche within the industry. A lot of my friends now, also during this time, especially being in the special boat service, a lot of them had set up their own maritime security companies, because on the east coast of Africa now, the Somali crisis was high. So they're all competing for that work. And what I didn't want to do is also be doing the same. I didn't want to be competing with them. I'd say when I speak to people when they're getting out, one of the key things I did was actually I cut away. My wife lived in Aberdeen in Scotland. So Aberdeen is the oil and gas capital of Europe. And it's about 650 miles from where I was based. You couldn't get any further from it in the UK. And one of the best things I did actually, which helped me mentally, was I cut away completely from that community. I moved away from that. So I wasn't bumping into guys in the shops or going into the bars and hearing their stories and feel like, I'm missing it. I just cut away completely. I just, not that I disconnected from them completely. I still had access to them if I needed, but I just went on my own journey. And it wasn't long during that trip, actually, that I was in Libya, that I then realized, actually, there's something here. So as soon as I arrived, I was listening to the Libyans, and they didn't want this to be another Afghanistan and Iraq. Once Gaddafi had fallen, they wanted to take control of their country. So Gaddafi was now in Tripoli. We're in Benghazi, and you have all the media companies, the oil and gas, all the NGOs, everyone's stacking up, ready to go into Tripoli once Gaddafi had fallen. And then I was listening, I never name and shame, but the the 5 largest security companies in the world, they were also in this hotel. And I was listening to them pitching. And they were charging 6-7-figure sums of crisis management and evacuation plans, which weren't actually in place, which I thought was actually, quite dangerous. And after a week, I had to fly back. Alana gave birth to our daughter, Molly. And I said, look, I think I found the niche. I think I have something that we can sort of literally focus on. And so, there was a huge proliferation of weapons at the time in Libya. And I knew I had a short window to get hold of these. And she flew back in, bought 30 weapons on the black market. And I just spent a month in the desert burying weapons from Tunis to Egypt with comms kit, with money, hopefully never needing to use them. Because we lived in Aberdeen, I had access to the oil subsidiary companies. And so I sold that as a retainer to them. And so we had something in place. But then as it was very interesting. I also, to add, I didn't have the pressure. My wife, as I mentioned, very entrepreneurial. She wasn't relying. I could have easily gone and got a full-time job with an oil and gas company doing 6-week rotations in Iraq. But then if you fast forward 5 years, your resume hasn't developed. You still have the same resume as you did in the military. So I wanted to really explore this security industry. When you tell people you're in the security industry, because the way I look with my bald head, my muscles and the tattoos, they think I'm a doorman from Club Tropicana. What I wasn't aware was how big this sector is and how diverse this sector is. I think other than AI and tech, security is still one of the fastest growing industries out there. Whether it's maritime, cyber, whether you're close protection, coaching or mentoring. And so each phone call I was getting, I was going to a different country. And so I was learning about, these countries, or to learn about these different security sectors. And I was really, I sort of know when you are in the military will show you what they want to show you, because it all has to be mission driven, it has to be part of the mission. Whereas now I almost had opportunity to look at the other side of the wire. I had flexibility of movement that I didn't have or would have had in the military. And obviously I was aware also I didn't have the support network of the military. If something went wrong, it would go drastically wrong. But in a short period of time, I was learning about all these cultures, these countries, and I was building up this really great network of subject matter experts from around the world. And, just to give the difference in projects, one phone call, you're taking the UAE royal family, their super yacht, which is 117 meters long, from Barcelona to the Maldives, which sounds amazing. And so, but then your next phone call, you're then flying out to Erbil in Iraq and you're training the Kurdish special forces to fight ISIS. There was everything in between. And one thing I also found out with the security industry, it wasn't risk-reward ratio balanced. So there's guys I knew in Iraq, coming under contact every day on 50% of what guys were doing, working with big CEOs and chairmen of the Fortune 500, staying in 5-star hotels and private jets around the world. And so that was that also was on my radar as well. Is actually you don't need to be taking these risks, for the rewards. And so like I said, I knew there was work, and then I soon realized that this is my new line of work, but how do we maximize on that?
I wrote down a couple things while you were talking, because earlier, before this question, you said something where, when you got injured, your whole military thing was a majority of the success was based on your physical capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
And so I couldn't help but think, while you're going through this transition and you're wondering, all right, what's next for me? Was there this, and you answered it really, and that was, man, did I lose at what, I wonder how much of it was, did I lose my capabilities or did I lose the target? And as I hear you talking, right, and then you getting excited about this new path, it was really the target. And quite honestly, you probably misunderstood what your real capabilities were. You probably thought they were you probably assumed that the majority of your success was because it was physical. Not to say a lot of it wasn't, but my guess is, my guess is what really came down was your intelligence, your leadership, stuff like that. Because anybody that pays attention to anybody that's in special forces and on this side of the pond, the Navy SEALs and the Delta Force and all those guys, it's probably less physical and a lot more mental. I can tell you right now, I don't care how strong I was. I don't know. I watch these guys or I listen to people like yourselves talk about some of the stuff they went through, and I'm like, holy shit. I don't know how y'all did it.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. You are right. I now had a new mission. But whereas the missions in the military, a lot of it is built on, you have to be physically fit, to be able to do that. Whether you're doing a 5K insurgent swim to then do a hostage rescue on an oil rig, or whether you're parachuting into Afghan and then walking 10 miles onto target and then going. There's a lot of, it's reliant on your physical abilities. Whereas here with the mission was slightly different. It wasn't reliant on my physical abilities. And so, which then made me also, when I was doing the planning, there was a lot more of intelligence led. I sort of joke when you tell people, I hear people in the security industry and they're like, oh yeah, we got into this contact. You go from being a good security operator will identify a risk and then go around it. They don't go through it. And so that's what I was doing here. I sort of realized, and I work on my own as well, I don't have those physical attributes, and I don't want to be caught in a position where I'm reliant on that. So how can I minimize that? And that will then turn to a lot of the more intelligence-led stuff. But it's true. I think when I got out, I then realized, one thing, I seized an opportunity. I saw an opportunity and I took the risk, and it paid off, and we now found ourselves in this position. And soon before you know it, I never say you're transitioning. We're always transitioning. We're still transitioning, we're always transitioning. But, my mind, anything that drifting away about my past had sort of gone now. It was now, rather than looking in the rearview mirror, I was looking through the windscreen in front of me.
I want to freeze the frame where Dean landed, because it's the most important sentence in this whole conversation. When the accident took his career, he didn't lose his capability. He lost his target. Everything that made him formidable, the discipline, the judgment, the way he reads a room, none of it went anywhere. He'd just been pointing it at one thing his whole life, and that one thing got taken away. You don't lose your edge when the mission ends. You lose the target it was pointed at. I hope you caught the other thing that he told us, because it's the quiet key to the whole story. When I asked why some transitions are smooth and some are a wreck, he didn't say talent. He said the support network, the people around you. The first real move he made wasn't a business move. It was cutting away from the old room and getting himself into a new one. So this week, before the next episode, do one honest thing. I want you to write down the 3 traits that actually got you here. Not your resume, the real ones. The ones that people closest to you would be able to name. Don't point them anywhere yet. Just prove to yourself that they're still in your hands. Because next episode, Dean hands you exactly how he pointed his at something brand new and did it more than once. And here's the piece that I don't want you to miss, because Dean said it better than any pitch I could write. Smooth transitions aren't about talent. They're about who's in the room with you. That's what the Business, Bourbon, and Cigars Leadership Retreat is. Think of it as an identity incubator. The next version of you doesn't get built alone in your own head. It gets built in an environment designed to grow it. The right people around you. A standard that you can't quietly lower, and a real challenge worth pointing yourself at. It's a room of operators who've made hard transitions, sold, pivoted, started over, and they've come out sharper. In fact, Dean's going to be in that room with us in Louisville this October. The kind of people who help you find your next target and hold you to it. Here's the offer. The first 5 people from this episode get 50% off their ticket. Spots are limited. They always go fast. Go to meplusultra.com/BBC50. That's meplusultra.com/BBC50 and claim your 50% off before it's gone. Next episode, part 2, the traits and the exact playbook that Dean used to rebuild. You won't want to miss it. Until then, stop staring in the rear view mirror. The next version of you is through the windscreen. I'm Scott Joseph. This has been Business, Bourbon, and Cigars. Cheers, everyone.